Good morning, everybody. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout for this very special event, and it's my great pleasure to welcome the President of the European Parliament, President Roberta Metsola, to SAIS for a very timely opportunity to reflect on Europe and transatlantic relations. It's especially timely. This has been a special week for us at SAIS. I've just come back this week from Bologna, where we celebrated the 70th anniversary of SAIS Europe, which has played, as I think many of you know, an extraordinary role in the history of transatlantic relations and has really been a center of both thinking and policy engagement around that. And we were privileged to have in this lovely ceremony that we had there to mark the occasion, former European Commissioner and Prime Minister of Italy, Paolo Gentiloni, who spoke to us at that time and gave a really extraordinary address on his perspective on the current state of transatlantic relations and the importance of this relationship. So it's lovely to be able to bookend this year, now here in Washington, with President Metzola's visit here and her remarks today and then her conversation with our esteemed colleague on the state of affairs. I don't need to tell anybody here that this really is an inflection moment in which the fundamental question about the nature and the importance and the role of transatlantic relations is very much at stake across the full range of issues in which we engage. And not only is it a set of issues around, a set of dialogues around specific issues, around security, around Ukraine, around economic relations, but really a fundamental question about the nature of the transatlantic community itself and whether there is beyond the specific areas of common interest a set of bonds and connections that transcend the more concrete. And I think that was an important part of Prime Minister Gentiloni's reflections, and I know we'll hear some today about that. But I do think, for all of us, particularly for those of us who spent a good part of our career working on transatlantic relations, I think it is an important moment to reflect on why we have come together and what that portends for the future and what the consequences are of a fundamental change in the relationship. So I'm eager to hear the President's remarks on that. And she is an extraordinary figure, and we're really very fortunate to have her here. She's now in her second term as President of the European Parliament. I'm told the youngest person ever to be elected to that role, which is something that all of our students here recognize, that even early in your career you can have an extraordinary impact. And she's really played, a critical role within the European Parliament and the European People's Party group on a full range of issues, including the time that she served as coordinator for the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice, and Home Affairs, which is an incredibly important thing and one of the hallmarks of one of the distinctive features of the European project. So, we're really fortunate to have her here and to have an opportunity to get her thoughts at this very crucial moment in transatlantic relations. So she's going to begin with some remarks, and then there'll be a dialogue with Matthias after that. So please join me in welcoming President Metsola.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for that warm welcome. It is truly an honor to be here at Johns Hopkins University, an institution that has shaped some of the brightest minds of our time. A place built on the belief that knowledge, diplomacy, and service are not just ideals, but forces that can change the world. And when we talk about the pursuit for a better world, peaceful, free, safe, and just, one of those minds put it best. She said, "This job of international leadership is not the kind of assignment one ever finishes. Old dangers rarely go away completely, and new ones appear as regularly as dawn. Dealing with them effectively has never been a matter of just money and might. Countries and people must join forces, and that doesn't happen naturally." That was Madeleine Albright, one of your own, a woman who understood that true strength does not come from looking inward, but from standing up for something greater. That isolation may look safe until it leaves you stranded. She spoke from experience, and that is precisely why she stood for a world where nations were able to come together, work together, and move forward. Multinational democratic exercise that was held last June, where all 27 countries voted for their representatives in the European Parliament, too many Europeans went to the polling booths out of a sense of frustration, out of a sense of desperation. And perhaps the situation is not so dissimilar on this side of the Atlantic. Now, I am by nature an optimist, but I think a degree of self-critical analysis, of listening and changing course when needed is important. It is how we can prove that our values aren't just words written in old manuscripts or archaic laws. But that is precisely because of them that we are able to make people's lives tangibly better and safer. It is because we believe in these values that we can work to find solutions to make it easier for companies to do business with and within Europe. In my time here, the last couple of days, I have been meeting with European industry leaders that have massive operations in the United States. My message to them: Europe has your back. I have also been meeting with US companies to explain Europe's future-driven approach, that we are open for business, because in our process of regeneration, I consider that this is truly an opportunity for us both. Some people may see Europe as a museum. They are wrong. Ours is the continent that sparked the Industrial Revolution, the very engine that helped transform America's economy. It was men and women of German, Italian, Irish, and Polish descent who rolled up their sleeves and laid the foundation for generations of American prosperity. Even Lady Liberty herself was forged out of European steel. Now, Europe is predictable, reliable, boring even. But in geopolitics, boring is not a bad thing. Do not underestimate the value of boring. Do not underestimate Europe's unity, resolve, strength, and willingness to act. And Europe is not just a story of the past. It is BMW, it is Volkswagen, it is Airbus, Lufthansa, and Mercedes-Benz, changing the way the world moves. It is Louis Vuitton, Ferrari, Hermes, Gucci providing and proving that European quality never goes out of style. It is Ericsson, Siemens, SAP, Spotify, Mistral, inventing, innovating, and pushing boundaries, employing thousands of people on this side of the Atlantic too. Now, we are proud of our European success stories, and that's why our global economic philosophy has always been to support free, open, and fair trade with our allies. Now, that does not mean that we're always going to have the same interests, but this does not have to be a permanent back and forth. We can find a way for all of us to win. That is always preferable to everyone losing, when it would be only those on the axis of autocracies who benefit from trade wars. That is why I think we should be talking about trade agreements rather than tariffs, pulling ourselves up together rather than the opposite. And we are not out to screw anyone. And this win-win attitude will always be our preferred approach. Of course, at the same time, we are ready for anything. So, allow me to be clear, the European Union will react firmly and immediately against unjust barriers to free and fair trade, including where tariffs are used to challenge legal and non-discriminatory policies. We don't want to go down that road, let me be clear, but we're ready. As President of the European Parliament, I preside over a House made up of 720 members. They come from 27 countries. They are spread into 8 political groups who speak 24 different languages. Mike Johnson and I like to compete as to who has the more difficult job in building majorities. Because as you can imagine, finding a middle ground is not always easy. But I can tell you that time and again we manage. Because in the words of your founding father, Thomas Jefferson, every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. That, in my view, is what our Transatlantic alliance is about. It's why it endures. It is a partnership that is built on a simple but powerful truth. We are stronger together Because when we stood shoulder to shoulder, we changed the course of history. We built a system that, for all its imperfections, has given more people more freedom, more prosperity, and more security than any alternative ever could. Today, we are being called to do so again. It is why when people look at your star-spangled banner, they do not just see a flag, they see a promise, a symbol of the American ideal. It is the same promise that our European flag represents. That's why when people in Europe's neighborhood stand against autocracy, when they're on the streets demanding that freedom, they do so under the banner of our 12 golden stars. And today, in Ukraine, that same fight for our values and ideals continue. For 3 years, men, women, girls and boys who ought to be in school have risked everything to stand against tyranny. And they are doing so not just for themselves, but for all of us. Because we know that when democracy is threatened somewhere, then it's a threat to all of us everywhere. For the benefit of those who may see history through different lenses, I also want to make one thing absolutely clear. The European Union is first and foremost a peace project. The entire point of 6 countries coming together to pool their coal and steel production just after the end of the Second World War was to push the prospect of another brutal, deadly war further and further away, to make it not merely unthinkable, but materially impossible. Peace is the essence of our European Union. So of course we want peace in Ukraine. We have always wanted that. We know as well as anyone else the cost and the devastation of war. Generations of Europeans lived it and still remember it. So peace will always be something that we are for. At the same time, we also need to be honest with ourselves. Peace without freedom, peace without dignity, peace without justice, peace not based on the principle of anything about Ukraine without Ukraine is no peace at all. Europeans who spent half a century under a boot behind an iron curtain understand this all too well. So yes, let's talk about peace. That is always a good thing. And let's be clear about what that means. A Ukraine that is not supported, that does not have the strength to resist, will not be in a position to find that elusive peace. That is why we stood with Ukraine, and that's why we continue to do so still. Because we know that peace must be a lasting one. And that means security for Ukraine and a deterrent for those who think that they can take it by force. And we cannot underestimate the very real danger that will come with simply postponing what is happening now into an even larger, wider war a couple of years down the line. That is something that Europe has been saying since day one. It was articulated very well by French President Macron earlier this week. And Europe is ready to play our part in guaranteeing peace and stability. We will step up because we know that this means peace and stability in Europe. And that is really a win-win for all. We may have our occasional disagreements. We will all defend our positions, but we are friends and we are partners. Not because we are homogeneous, but because we are, and we can say that our greatest victories come from our shared conviction of doing what is right. That is what makes us truly great. And we can do that while upholding our values, while honoring our fallen heroes, while strengthening the very ideals that make our continent so great in the first place. In this new world, that must be our guiding light. And that must be the spirit that pushes us forward. Thank you. Don't kill my phone.
Thank you, President Metsola, so much for, sorry to spill water on your phone. It was my intention.
You know, my kids will start messaging at right about this time, so if I don't answer them immediately, you know, I'm in trouble.
You're not in trouble. Your speech resonated with me as I read your bio more closely in preparation for this meeting. We share the same birth year, and I remember watching the same crammy TV growing up in Belgium, seeing the Berlin Wall coming down. And it does feel like we're far away from that world sometimes right now. We only have half an hour, and I know you have many meetings here and a hard stop at 11:30, but I wanted to ask you one question, and that's, thinking back of the first Trump administration, the European Union often had a hard time being heard. Unlike the countries of Europe, whether it was France or Germany or at the time still the UK. Right now, it seems again to be the case that the EU is struggling to get a hearing with the Trump administration. And you mentioned your meetings with American businesses and European businesses. So can you talk a little bit what the European Union strategy is right now to make sure that you can avoid being divided against one another and speak with one voice, and what the EU strategy is to kind of convince this administration that doing direct business with the EU as an entity is in its own interest?
I think it's regaining our self-confidence. In 2016, there was credibility to the argument that for many years, Europe was waiting for someone else to solve its problems. That if things really went wrong, the United States would come. That was the belief. Why? It had been decades of prosperity, enlargement. Those countries that were behind the Iron Curtain, progressing massively in terms of freedoms, in terms of growth, in terms of visibility. But in 2022, that changed. And it changed, I would say, to the point where Europe had to wake up and say, this is not going to be okay. We are not well prepared. We have some countries that are almost 100% reliant on Russian gas. We have not adopted packages of sanctions in decades. Our economies are not strong enough. And most importantly, our voters are losing their faith in us. So last year in 2024, and that's why I made a reference to the election, because that was a real concern for us, is that our young people, our older generations were not believing that our political parties that were running elections, have been in power for a very long time, could guarantee the basics. Have a job, have a house, and have your children walk safely in the street. And I mention all this because when we talk to our American counterparts, there is full agreement. What were the discussions in the campaign? What did voters want? I can speak for my voters and what they want. And what they definitely do not want is to have a conflict with the United States. So that's why I'm here. I'm not worried. I mean, I'm not going to say it's ideal, but I want to believe that that self-confidence that we can have in stating how much on the table does our trade relationship mean. We are the largest trade partners. We are, I said boring, what I could have said also is reliable. You meet American companies who invest heavily in Europe and they say that's a market that can grow because there is a huge potential. You meet European companies that are operating here and say, give us the possibility to grow, export, protect consumers, yes. Don't regulate too much. Don't drown us with your laws. Everything, all of this is said. And I think if we manage across the table to say this is what we stand for, yes, things could improve. Yes, things could have been done better. But we are certainly not going to look away and think that alliances like this can be replaced. You know, there are more people in the world that cannot choose their leaders than there are people who can. We are, you know, democratic allies. We have elections, we vote, we have administrations that come and go. But the values are the same. We can also discuss I think that's why I wanted to mention the concept of freedom of speech, like how we actually consider that to be a cornerstone of everything we stand for. But I also think that perhaps we don't explain it enough, or that we just think it's going to go away. So I would say confidence, clarity, truth, and admittance that, you know, some things could be done better.
That's a very good answer. I'm going to open it up. I want to give priority to students to ask questions. Again, state your name and ideally what you're doing here. And keep your question relatively short. And President Metsola has promised to keep her answer relatively short.
I'm from the South. I would tend to talk a lot.
Hello, President Metsola. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Łukasz. I'm from Poland, so thank you very much for mentioning Solidarność movement. I'm here as exchange student from Paris, Sciences Po. My question is about the treaty change proposed by the European Parliament in November 2023. The European Parliament adopted very bold measures. It proposed to create a real defense union, rapid deployment capacities, which will be steered at the European level, extended mandate of the European Defence Agency. I'm wondering what was the reaction from the Council or European Council on that, and are you going to pursue these bold ideas for European defence? Thank you.
Please ask your Prime Minister that. Sorry. So the European Parliament is always incredibly ambitious, right? Now more than ever, actually. So if you had to ask what the current members would do post-2023, there would be even bolder proposals to, for example, create a real security and defense union that would be complementary and not competing with NATO. Gives us the possibility also to have flexibility in terms of budgetary allocation when we need to increase spending and on what. And again, when we talk about defense spending, it's not hard military equipment alone, it's cybersecurity, resilience, infrastructure, borders. The invasion of Ukraine also brought us to the harsh reality that what we've been talking about, which was an energy union for over a decade, was incredibly far from reality. That you had countries and still have countries that are essentially islands. The Iberian Peninsula is not connected to France. France is very largely dependent on nuclear. Germany is not. Some countries have reverted to using coal, fossil fuel importation, LNG. All of this is what our demand would be. The reaction to that was positive. There is acknowledgement of the fact that we need to be more agile and we need to be more flexible and also creative. I'm also, however, not going to, let's say, be bogged down in having a treaty change process that would last years only for there to be one country blocking the process the whole time. I would rather find creative ways of creating these unions. I would also, after the pandemic, say, where are we on health? And I would also say today that finally, perhaps, we could create a capital markets union and a digital euro. Give you one example. In 2008, Europe's largest bank was as big as JP Morgan. Today, JP Morgan is 10 times the size. So we are on a growth trajectory, but it should be much faster. So treaty change, yes, if it's going to make us more agile and flexible and not bogged down in years of resistance. And the defense union, the health union, and the energy union are something that I think we can make huge progress on, especially now.
Excellent question. Yes, in the back, please. And the woman with the glasses and the blonde hair.
My name is Stephanie Bolzen. I'm afraid I was a student quite a while ago. I'm now the correspondent of Welt, a German newspaper. Madam President, I would like to ask you, the French President Macron was here on Monday, Keir Starmer is here today, tomorrow President Zelensky. They all want to hear from Donald Trump that he commits to security guarantees for Ukraine. It doesn't look like this is going to happen. Now my question to you, can Europe secure on her own safety peace deal? Thank you.
So I was very encouraged after the meeting with Macron. I think it was well timed. It showed leadership. It showed openness of understanding, and it showed that there is a relationship that could be worked upon and built on. I take it positively, and I would expect the same to happen with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom today, in expectation of what will be discussed with President Zelensky tomorrow. When both, leaving aside, let's say, perhaps some of the statements that have been made in the past few days that are, let's say, ad hoc, I think there is a general understanding that the war needs to come to an end, that peace must be sought. And I spent a lot of time in my speech talking about peace because what we need to avoid at all costs is a repeat of what happened in 2008 and in 2014, where you have a protracted frozen war that could be reignited at any moment, and that there is vulnerability there. The meaning of security guarantees was also mentioned and responded to by the President of France and also by the Prime Minister of the UK in terms of what would presence on the ground be within the NATO framework and outside it. If you see the role that has been played by Poland, by Romania, so countries that share a border with Ukraine, you can see readiness. Is there full preparedness? Is there now discussion in each country as to whether we're not only talking about defense spending, but people on the ground? Readiness to have obligatory re-enlisting. This is happening in a number of countries. This is quite personal to me. I'm married to a Finn, and that is a country that has taken its neighbor very seriously for many years, ever since 10% of its territory was lost in a very similar manner. And I think the question that we need to ask all of us, and it is perhaps easier to answer it because of proximity, in other words, we are close geographically to where this is happening, and that when you talk about a security guarantee within the NATO framework, it can mean different things for different countries. But it also means that we do not delude ourselves that there are imperialistic ideas in Europe, on the continent. And that is a dangerous thing to conceive when it comes to territorial integrity. And that, I think, should be explained better. And every country and every leader would tell you the same. That if there's one responsibility you have is over your territory. And you need to protect it. And your neighbors understand that if you don't protect it or they help you protect it, then they could be next. And that, I think, has not emerged clearly enough. And what I would hope to see in the next 2 days, whatever the shape of any agreement is, but also for us not to live under the question of whether it's going to happen again. A few years ago, we didn't think it would happen, but it did. The countries in the neighborhood told us it would, but we didn't listen to them. I remember for years, my Baltic, Polish colleagues, late at night in meetings saying, beware, this is going to happen. Silence from everyone else. No one believed it. And then it happened. And that also meant that, of course, we've stepped up in our spending, our preparedness, but we need to do much more. And I'm hoping that the involvement that was referred to by President Trump means exactly that.
I should mention that President Metsola and her Finnish husband were the first couple to run for European Parliament.
We both failed,
in different states, and you both didn't make it.
Yeah.
But that's a long time. You ended up okay, I think.
So I ran twice before I got elected. And on the second election, we did the craziest thing of running for the European Parliament in 2 different countries, and both narrowly defeated, and then made an agreement that whoever goes into politics, the other one will quit, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. Next question, please. Let's take a couple up front, and then we'll take a few in the back. Short answers, and this week we can get everybody in. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much, President Metsola, for being here at SAIS. My name is Harry Otmos. I'm a second-year master's student here at the school. My question has to do with something that you mentioned in your speech. You talked about the axis of autocracies and how Europe is in the fight against this axis of autocracies. Do you feel that due to the recent political challenges in this side of the Atlantic, that Europe is increasingly standing alone against this axis of autocracy?
Yeah, go ahead. Right, give the mic right ahead. Yeah, we'll do you three.
Madam Stavros Peridis.
Stavros, go ahead.
I'm also from Greece. My question is, you talked a lot about freedom of speech. And the question is, how do you feel about the comments, or how does the European Parliament feel about the comments from the US government, Elon Musk, the Vice President, on the differences between free speech here in the United States and Europe? Because if you offend someone in the European Union, it can be considered a crime, in a sense. But there are different values on what we consider free speech, so some reflection on that.
Thank you, Stavros. Yes. And then we'll have some answers.
Nina Gardner. I am adjunct faculty here teaching business and human rights, and you said that you met with some of the business community here. Clearly you know what happened yesterday, the omnibus regulation on all of the due diligence on human rights and environmental regulations that was part of the European Parliament's first push, and the Green New Deal got blown up and eviscerated. So I was wondering whether you will be reviewing that and what you're hearing from the business community here. I also hope you're hearing from the right business community.
Excellent. So, access of autocracies, freedom of speech, human rights. And then we'll do another round.
Okay.
Let's
So,
have some answers.
No, you'll get answers, don't worry, on everything. I don't think we feel alone in fighting an axis of we can't. You know, I'm an elected politician. I am responsive and accountable to my constituents. My constituents asked me, you know, this is in any democracy, you are in office until your constituents decide otherwise, right? That is exactly what happens here and everywhere where there are elections. I would also find comfort in very strong alignment speeches by congressmen and senators from across the aisle here, saying that we need to really continue to fight for our values and freedom of speech, liberty being at the very top. What we cannot, however, underestimate is that an alliance of democracies also means that you can trade with each other. I would much rather, if we talk about energy diversification, start to rely more on the United States than on perhaps the slightly less reliable neighbors of our continent, where elections don't exist and rights are not protected, where minorities are crushed, where women are never seen. That, to me, would be a fundamental betrayal of everything I believe in. And there I think we can work together, and for us, the meaning of an autocrat is the same, wherever you are, if you are living in a democracy. Free speech versus censorship. What we sometimes see as the protection of a person to say whatever he or she wants, but without incitement of hatred, violence, terrorism, could be interpreted as being an extension of what is known as censorship. We refute that. And we refute it because I can tell you that I am the constant target of journalists, questions, opinions, criticisms or not, depending. And this is Europe. And that's how it should be. And it's my responsibility to respond to that. Do I think it's fair? Not always. But Europe benefits from that. And if we don't say this, then those who lived behind the Iron Curtain and had zero rights and freedoms will not be able to say that we are doing them justice. Because for decades they had none. So how do we do it? How do we project ourselves? Is it true that perhaps we have not been able to find the right balance between privacy and liberty? You know, I'm a lawyer, we can discuss this at length. Is it true that we could now look at certain of the decisions that were taken by the social media platforms? By the way, we are the largest customers of those social media platforms. We're not aiming to create parallel structures. We use them, we are consumers, and we pay quite a lot. And therefore, that means that rules that should be upheld need to be upheld. And this is not only rules here, but rules in the European Union, rules elsewhere. But again, those social media platforms cannot operate in China. They are not operating in many of the places in the world, but they operate fully. Do I wish that they could be more open? That we could be more flexible in the way, for example, AI is used inside Europe and not blocked so that we do not stunt growth and research? Yes, we could do much better. And this move links me to the evisceration, as you called it, of the due diligence. You know, this was my 5th European Parliament election campaign, and every campaign is different. And in every campaign, I can tell you that there's one thing that dominates discussions, that is used by populists in order to attack the European Union. It could be migration, it could be development aid. This time it was the CSDD. Nobody knew what CSDD stood for, but they knew there was something bad. And the reality is that if you have legislation that is well-intentioned, well thought out, potentially well drafted, if it's not going to work, you have to look at it. So if essentially pieces of legislation are going to drive businesses out of Europe, we have a problem. If essentially you have government leaders asking for help, especially in the gas, fuel, electricity systems, where you need to rely on third countries, and legislation makes that impossible or unimplementable, we need to look at it. So this came on my desk yesterday. I spent early this morning with my team a lot of time to see, because it's my role, it's my position to decide which committees this goes to, how fast it goes. What I can assure you is that we will be efficient in seeing where things could improve, and also a realistic assessment that this parliament is very different to the previous one, which means that the majorities will be flipped on this. It's our responsibility, we will do our job, but we will also need to be realistic. So where we go.
All right, let's have 3 more very quick ones in the back, please. Starting in the back, and then we'll come forward. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Robert. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. I would be curious if you could talk about the role you foresee the UK playing in the European Defence Union. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Next one? Yeah, right here. Right here? Here. Up front, come forward. Go ahead.
Madam President, it's an honor to have you here and to be speaking to you. And I'm Carlo. I'm a first-year MAIR student. I'm from the Philippines, and I want to ask you something about something that you may not be in town for business. I know you're in town for transatlantic relations, but I'd like to ask you about Indo-Pacific security. Part here in the discussions here in Washington is that says, and that's particularly close to President Trump, says that Europe is no longer one of the priorities of the United States. The bigger threat now is China. And as for the Philippines, we know that because we have China on our doorstep. I'd like to ask you something. Do you think Europe should take a role in the Indo-Pacific security? Or if you think the EU is already doing that, do you think it should do more and, say, stand with the United States in the Indo-Pacific or with democracies in the region? Thank you.
Thank you. And then last question, we have Jackson Barber here. It does have its advantages to take my class.
Favoritism.
Yeah, I suppose a little bit.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Madam President, for being here. You talked a little bit earlier about the need for more agility and European businesses and things like that. So I wanted to ask kind of specifically about the Draghi report and some of the things that have been recommended there. Whenever the report came out a couple months ago, to much fanfare and what felt like little action. So you've talked about a capital markets union, you've talked about a digital union, health union, things like that. What is the consensus that you see in the parliament and in your party about the steps that are necessary, and what actions have you been taking in leadership to force that through? Thank you.
Thank you, guys. So, UK, Indo-Pacific, pivot to Asia, jointly or not, and economic reform.
So, I wish the United Kingdom was still in the European Union. I can start saying that, but that's a decision that was taken, and we need to respect that democratic decision. I'm very encouraged by the renewed, as Keir Starmer calls it, reset in relations. It is incredibly good, not only at Prime Minister level, but also at Parliament level. So we have a very close relationship with House of Commons and my counterpart, Lindsay Hoyle. And I think that a discussion or a commitment by the UK, especially in the latest pronouncements by the Prime Minister, are very encouraging. First of all, there was a need for the UK to take a lead in terms of defence, in terms of spending, also in terms of agility, because that is something we rely on. And we rely on as partners. And that means also that discussions will need to take place in terms of production, of equipment, trade agreements, procurement, licensing, patents, all of this. There is a big willingness on both sides to step up. I can tell you that we continue to rely on UK intelligence, for example. UK has some of the best intelligence agencies, if not the best in the world, if I can say that. And I think we need to be clear about it, because we rely on that significantly. And I actually rely on that as a parliament and an institution that is quite a vulnerable one, in the sense that we have 7,000 people, 720 members, all with individual opinions, some of which are not liked by some autocracies. And those are usually followed by a significant effort to take us down. From a cyber perspective, we have also been the targets of attacks, and we have had to shore up our security infrastructure massively in the past few years. Carlo, fully agree. Do we do enough? No. This is a question that I will follow up, if you allow me, with the High Representative, who herself, and we have been discussing this for a long time, told me, and rightly so, that for far too long the European Union has focused on a few parts of the world, but not on the rest. Africa, one. Indo-Pacific, another. Latin America depends on whether there is an impetus or not. It's not clear. But I would definitely like to see an increased attention and strength. Why? Because there is an interest. You mentioned China. We have not always been consistent on China. I cannot tell you that all member states are aligned. There is significant differences of opinion based on economic relationship, but an overwhelming or at least common understanding that this is a country that relies on a completely different value set to ours. And there I think we can align with the US, and we can be clearer with the US on this. I cannot tell you that it will happen, but that's my position, and it's definitely the position of the Parliament. And you will have strong majorities there. The Draghi report. I agree with you that, we love reports in the European Union. We love to commission them. We love to have press conferences when they are published. Sorry, I have to be really careful. I'm being recorded. I'm being recorded, right? A lot of summits. Yeah. I've been in this business for a long time, and but I haven't been in the business for as long as others, and I really like to tease my older peers, like, all right, how long are we going to do this? Mario Draghi told us to inject 800 billion euros a year. And that is based on a very simple calculation, that if we don't do that, European economy will continue to contract, in some countries more than others, Germany being in particular focus here. Two, that it is a question not only of where you find the money, but how you use the money. It is not a question of the European Union not having cash. It is a wealthy continent. It is how it's used and how much, equivalent of, also in the Draghi report, 300 billion euros lost every year because we have fictitious borders. We've spent so much time removing internal borders for us to say we have free movement, only for them to be immediately resurrected whenever a virus turns up, whenever a public event turns up, whenever there is mistrust between one country and another. That agility is what will it take for us to inject money in our economy to be able to become competitive. We have great universities. We are the #1 continent in the invention and creation of patents, but a fraction of them result in investment in Europe. The rest come here. Why? Because access to capital is impossible. It is impossible for you to start a company if you do not have that capital. It is against our culture, somehow, to fail and start again. The concept of having movement between the public sector and the private sector and back doesn't exist. And if we don't take that from that excellent report, then I can't face my voters in 5 years' time when I go, 4.5 now, and tell them, you know what, you told me to do this, this and this. Actually, wasn't our fault. The governments didn't let us, or one country blocked us, or I didn't find the majorities. I can't afford to do that anymore. The voters gave us the strongest and clearest of messages last June, and they want us to get our act together. And we get our act together if we manage to make the step from being the beacon of talent to keeping that talent and growing it. If we don't do that, we're going to lose, no matter how much money we inject in our economy. So I started a bit with a joke about how much we like reports, but if we don't read them, then we're not going to do anything. So I think we really owe it to ourselves, but we owe it to all of you to get our act together. Otherwise, I would be denying the accountability and the responsibility that I've been entrusted with.
Read them and implement them. Bravo. Madam President, thank you so much for coming to SAIS, and thank all of you for your great questions. And we owe you 8 minutes next time. Okay, thank you very much for staying a bit longer.
Did I stay longer, 8 minutes? Yeah, but they haven't started jumping up and down in the beginning first, so that's usually a good sign. Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.